Valerian, the most powerful ruler in the entire Roman Empire, the man who commanded every legion, every fleet, and every province from Britain to Persia, was captured alive on a battlefield, spent his final years being used as a human footstool by a foreign king, and after his death was skinned, stuffed with straw, dyed purple, and hung in a Persian temple for 300 years as a trophy. Valerian marched east in 260 AD to fight the Persian king Shapur I at the Battle of Edessa. His army was destroyed. He was taken alive, the first Roman emperor ever captured by an enemy. Shapur used him as a stepping stool to mount his horse every single day. When Valerian finally died in captivity, Shapur had his skin peeled from his body, stuffed with straw, dyed imperial purple, and displayed in Persia's greatest temple. It stayed there for 3 centuries. Vitellius, the supreme ruler of Rome, the man who sat on the most powerful throne in the known world, was dragged half-naked through his own capital city with a sword blade pressed under his chin, forcing his head up so he could not look away from the jeering crowd, tortured publicly for hours, then dragged away through the streets with a meat hook driven through his throat. Vitellius ruled Rome in 69 AD during the chaotic year of the 4 emperors. When Vespasian's forces took the city, soldiers found Vitellius hiding in a doorkeeper's lodge, his face smeared with dirt trying to disguise himself. They dragged him out half-naked into the streets. A blade was pressed under his chin, forcing his head upward so the crowd could see his face as they mocked him. He was tortured on the Gemonian stairs for hours, then killed, then dragged to the Tiber with a hook through his throat. Elagabalus, the teenage emperor of the greatest empire in human history, the man who commanded 3 continents and the most powerful military on earth, was murdered at 18 by his own soldiers, stripped completely naked, dragged through the streets of Rome, stuffed headfirst into a sewer drain, and eventually thrown into the Tiber, where his body washed up in Rome's main sewage channel. Elagabalus became emperor at 14 and ruled for 4 chaotic years before his own Praetorian Guard turned on him in 222 AD. He tried to hide in a latrine when he heard the soldiers coming. They found him, killed him on the spot, and decapitated him alongside his mother, who had refused to let go of him. Both bodies were stripped naked and dragged through Rome's streets. Soldiers attempted to force his body into a sewer drain. When it didn't fit, they threw him into the Tiber. He washed up in Rome's main sewage system. He was 18 years old. Pupienus and Balbinus, 2 of the most powerful co-rulers in the history of the Roman Empire, men who commanded the greatest armies the world had ever seen, were stripped naked simultaneously by their own Praetorian Guard, dragged through the streets of Rome while crowds jeered, had their fingers cut off one by one, tortured publicly for hours, and thrown into the Tiber when it was finally over. Pupienus and Balbinus were appointed co-emperors by the Roman Senate in 238 AD to rule together. The Praetorian Guard hated them from the start. They were Senate men, not soldiers' men. After just 99 days, the Guard stormed the palace during a public games event, dragged both emperors out naked into the streets, and began working through them methodically. Fingers were removed. Bodies were cut. The crowd watched. Both men were tortured publicly for hours in the streets of Rome before being killed and thrown into the Tiber together. 99 days. That was all they got. Caligula, the absolute ruler of the Roman Empire, a man so powerful he declared himself a living god and made his horse a senator, was cornered in a narrow underground corridor beneath the Palatine Hill by his own bodyguards, stabbed 30 times, and then his soldiers walked directly to his wife and infant daughter and killed them both in the same hour. Caligula ruled Rome from 37 to 41 AD and terrorized the entire empire with 4 years of executions, humiliations, and paranoid cruelty. On January 24, 41 AD, he was walking through an underground corridor beneath the Palatine Hill when his own Praetorian Guard surrounded him. The first blade went into his shoulder, then 29 more followed, the exact same number of wounds inflicted on Julius Caesar, his great-great-grandfather. His wife was killed immediately after. His infant daughter was then taken and her head smashed against a wall. The entire family was erased in a single afternoon. Pertinax, the emperor of the greatest empire on earth, a man who had clawed his way from a freed slave's son to the ruler of Rome, was stormed by 300 of his own Praetorian Guards after just 87 days in power, stabbed to death inside his own palace, his head mounted on a spear, and those same guards then auctioned the entire Roman Empire to the highest bidder from the palace walls. Pertinax took the throne in 193 AD after the assassination of Commodus and immediately began cutting the guards' privileges and enforcing military discipline. They gave him 87 days. On March 28, 300 Praetorian soldiers stormed the imperial palace with drawn swords. Pertinax walked out to meet them alone and tried to reason with them. One soldier threw a spear. The rest followed. He was stabbed to death in the palace courtyard. His head was cut off and mounted on a spear. The guards then literally stood on the palace walls and auctioned the Roman throne to whoever offered the most gold. Caracalla, one of the most feared and powerful rulers in Roman history, a man who personally commanded the largest military force on the planet, was stabbed once through the back by a single soldier while he stopped by the side of a road to urinate, fell face first into the dirt, and died alone in the dust without a single person coming to help him. Caracalla ruled Rome from 100 AD to 217 AD and was one of its most brutally effective military emperors, feared by enemies, feared by his own men, feared by the Senate. On April 8, 217 AD, while traveling near Carrhae in modern Turkey, Caracalla stopped his horse by the roadside to relieve himself. A soldier named Justin Martialis walked up behind him and drove a blade through his back. He fell forward into the dirt. His bodyguards stood and watched. Not one man moved to help. The most feared emperor in Rome died face down in the dust with his clothes around his ankles. Commodus, the Roman emperor who believed himself to be the reincarnation of Hercules, the most powerful man in the known world, was poisoned by his own mistress, vomited the poison back up, so the conspirators sent his personal wrestling trainer Narcissus into his private bath and had him strangled with bare hands while naked, semi-conscious, and completely helpless in the water. Commodus ruled Rome from 177 to 192 AD, renaming the city after himself, fighting gladiatorial matches in the Colosseum, and executing anyone who questioned his divinity. On the night of December 31, 192 AD, his own mistress Marcia slipped poison into his food. He ate it, felt the effects, and vomited everything back up before it could kill him. The conspirators panicked. They sent Narcissus, his personal wrestling trainer who trained with him daily, into his private bathroom. Narcissus found him naked and weak in his bath. He wrapped his hands around Commodus's throat and strangled him until he stopped moving. The god emperor died helpless in his own bathwater. Galba, the supreme commander of the Roman world, the man who inherited the throne of the Caesars and ruled an empire stretching across 3 continents, was beheaded in broad daylight in the middle of the Roman Forum. His severed head passed between soldiers, mocked by camp boys on a lance, and eventually purchased by a freedman who threw it onto the grave of a man Galba had previously executed. Galba became emperor in 68 AD following the death of Nero, but lasted only 7 months before his refusal to pay the Praetorian Guard their promised bonus sealed his fate. On January 15, 69 AD, soldiers cut him down in the middle of the Roman Forum in front of thousands of people. His head was hacked off and passed between soldiers like a trophy. Camp boys mounted it on a lance and paraded it through the streets, mocking it. It was then purchased by a freedman, not to honor it, but to throw it onto the grave of a man Galba had ordered executed months earlier. Maximinus Thrax, the most physically imposing emperor in Roman history, a giant of a man who rose from a Thracian peasant to sole ruler of the Roman Empire, was murdered in his own tent by his own starving troops, his head and his young son's head cut off together and sent to Rome on a spike, a crow seen pecking his eyes out on the road to the city. Maximinus Thrax stood nearly 8 feet tall by some accounts and rose from a common soldier to emperor through pure physical dominance and military brutality. He ruled from 235 to 238 AD through terror and iron discipline. His campaign against Rome stalled at the walls of Aquileia, where his own troops sat starving and exhausted outside the city. They had had enough. Soldiers walked into his tent in the middle of the day and killed him where he stood. His son was killed beside him. Both heads were cut off and sent to Rome together on a single spike. A crow landed on Maximinus's head during the journey and pecked out both his eyes while it traveled. Well, Domitian, the iron-fisted ruler of the Roman Empire, a man who called himself Lord and God and executed senators for sport, was lured into reading a document by his own servants, stabbed first through the groin, grabbed the blade with his bare hands trying to pull it out, and was stabbed 7 more times by every person in the room while bleeding and screaming on the floor of his own palace. Domitian ruled Rome from 81 to 96 AD through absolute terror, filling the Senate with fear, executing rivals on fabricated charges, and demanding to be addressed as a deity. His own palace staff eventually conspired against him. On September 18, 96 AD, a steward named Stephanus approached him with a document, asked him to read it, and the moment Domitian looked down, drove a blade directly into his groin. Domitian grabbed the blade with both bare hands trying to pull it free, slicing his fingers open to the bone. 7 more stab wounds followed from everyone else in the room. He died on the floor of his own palace, clutching a knife with destroyed hands. Constans II, the last ruler of a Roman Empire that had survived for over 1,000 years, the most powerful Christian emperor of his age, was attacked by his own chamberlain while washing his hair in the bath, struck repeatedly in the head with a heavy silver bucket, and drowned face first in the bathwater, killed with a bathroom tool by the one man whose only job was to serve and protect him. Constans II ruled the Byzantine Roman Empire from 641 to 668 AD, and spent decades holding together an empire under siege from every direction: Arabs, Slavs, and internal rebellion. He relocated to Syracuse in Sicily, trying to rebuild imperial power in the west. On September 15, 668 AD, he was in his private bath, head bowed forward, having his hair washed, when his chamberlain, Andreas, picked up a heavy silver washing bucket and began striking him across the head. He was struck repeatedly until he stopped moving and slipped face first into the bathwater. The most powerful man in the Roman world was killed by his own bathroom attendant with a bucket.